Kentucky just wrapped up its primary election season, and several outside organizations and PACs engaged at a high level. Churchill Downs, the Kentucky Hospital Association, Jefferson County Teachers Association, and their PAC all donated big money to Republican-identified political action committees to defeat conservative candidates for the state legislature. I'm Richard Nelson, your host, and thank you for joining the Commonwealth Matters. There's a little-known group that engaged the elections and had an outsized impact. The group is called Conservatives for the Commonwealth. And joining us to talk further are a couple of the board members from the group. David Dickerson of Glasgow is the board president. Gary Houchens of Bowling Green is also a board member. Unfortunately, Corey Colner of Louisville could not join us. But gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining the program.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having us on.
Hey, David, I'm going to start with you. You're the president of the board. Just some background about you. You're the former judge executive of Barron County. You were also a cabinet secretary of public protection under the Bevin administration. So you have some working knowledge and firsthand experience of engaging politically. And David, you could have been disengaged or not involved with this new political action group. Why did you get involved? What was it that prompted you to get involved with a conservative group that was going to impact legislative races?
Richard, one of the things I think it's important for all of us to remember is that we have an obligation as citizens of the Commonwealth and citizens of America to participate in the electoral process where we have an opportunity to have our voices heard by helping to elect people that believe and espouse the same beliefs that we have. It was very important for us this time because we saw really what I think was an unwarranted attack against conservative members of the House, and the group got together and we were able to have, as you mentioned, some reasonable success in protecting incumbents and defending some of the incumbents that we wanted to defend, and even turning the House maybe a little more conservative by a couple of the races we were able to be successful in.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Gary Houchens, I want to go to you. You are a professor of education at Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green. You also served on the state school board. And you, again, you could be enjoying your summer and have not had headaches of engaging politically. Why did you get involved with Conservatives for the Commonwealth?
Yeah, well, as you noted, Richard, I'm an academic both by profession and disposition. And so I have cared a great deal about education policy for a number of years and have been engaged at the state level in education policy. My comfort zone really is in writing op-eds and policy briefs and in lecturing and speaking about these topics and sharing the research. But one of the things that I've learned over the years, particularly working with lawmakers, is that you can have the most well-reasoned argument possible. You can have all the research data on your side. And if lawmakers don't find it politically expedient to support your position, then often they won't. And so it has become clear to me that if we want to advance genuinely pro-family education policies in Kentucky, that we also have to engage at the electoral level. And we have to hold our lawmakers to a high standard of performance in terms of their voting records and the positions that they take on these issues. And so even though I would probably much rather devote my energies toward more academic pursuits, and I continue to do that too, of course, but it's become very important to me that we also engage there at the electoral level.
Very good. Very good. I'd like to go to the mission statement of Conservatives for the Commonwealth, according to the statement that's on your website, that you exist to elect and retain principled conservative political candidates in Kentucky. David, I'm going to go to you. How do you define a principled conservative?
Well, there are certain principles that are more important, or in fact at a higher level of importance than any others. Number one is a belief that, as the Declaration of Independence wrote, divine providence has a hand in everything that we do. God has a hand in everything that we do. We don't want a theocracy. We want to continue to have a democratically elected Republican form of government. where people can freely express their ideas and can freely participate in the system, and be assured that the government is going to protect their rights rather than dictate to them from on high the things that they should do. And Gary mentioned earlier education freedom being one of the things that we hold most dear, and it is. We need to make sure that our system meets the needs of the Commonwealth in an effective way. Another thing that we want to be sure that we do is be fiscally responsible. I think as that we proceed with this, fiscal responsibility is the most important thing that we can actually do past the divine providence, the questions that God leads us to do. The thing that we can really have an effect is make sure that we're fiscally responsible. Spend the money where it needs to be spent, but don't do frivolous spending. If I may, for just a moment, when we were in Frankfurt as in the public protection cabinet, we had budgetary problems. We were short on budget items. Well, people will tell you, you can't cut the budget. You can't cut the budget. Well, the first 6 months we were there, the first budget year we finished, we cut the budget in the public protection cabinet over $50 million. And we didn't miss a thing. We addressed all the needs of the people. We were efficient. We moved very quickly on granting licenses in a careful and thorough way. We didn't lose anything on auditing financial institutions. We dealt with insurance companies. All those matters, we didn't miss a beat, and we didn't spend all that money that was budgeted. We actually cut our budget. So that's one purpose that we need to have in our work toward electing officials, is to make sure that they're fiscally responsible.
Yeah, very good. Going to the four guiding principles of conservatives for the Commonwealth, David, you had mentioned that God is the source of our freedoms. You mentioned fiscal integrity, fiscal responsibility, but then also I want to look at the kind of political leadership that you're looking for. You say that you want political leaders to promote policies that defend life and the integrity of the human person, that protect families against the scourge of evil, that advance education policies, Gary, to your point, that prioritize parental rights and pro-family values, and then defend individual liberty and limit the size and scope of government. I want to drill down on the protecting human families against the scourge of evil. And either one of you jump in on this, but how would you define, what do you see happening out there in our culture today that would undermine or assault the traditional family?
Richard, if I may, and Gary, with your permission, one of the things that troubles me more than anything is that we have people at the federal and some even at the state level that deny the existence of two genders. And that's a problem. There are only two. I remember from high school biology, and that was over 50 years ago, I'll tell you. High school biology, we were taught that there were X and Y chromosomes, and that was it. X and Y determined a male, and X determined a female. And that's it. That's all. You can't have any other. And I think that was designed by God for the first book of the Bible. He created man and he created woman, and that's the only two genders that exist. We have people in the federal level and people even in Frankfurt that deny that that's the case. We have representatives who've called folks that believe in two genders Neanderthals, and that nothing could be further from the truth. That's the only biological distinction that can possibly be made. You can't argue it any other way, and unless you're going to deny the existence of divine providence and to deny the writings of Scripture. So I think we're on solid ground there. We don't need boys participating in girls' sports. We don't need boys going into girls' bathrooms or vice versa. Girls don't need to go into boys' bathrooms. We do not need in any way, shape, or form to have hospitals like the one at Vanderbilt University bragging about how much money they made by gender-affirming surgeries on children that didn't know what they were doing. And there have been a number of witnesses that have testified that if they'd only known, if people had only told them the truth, that they would never have undergone the changes that they did to alter their genders. And because it can't be done, you're still going to be You're still going to be a boy or girl. You're still going to be a man or a woman. You can't change you can't change your biological makeup. And so that's one of the things that we want to make sure that we always support members of the General Assembly who do know and do admit that we're gender specific in what we do, and we want to protect those people. We want to protect the boy. We want to protect the girls from some of the situations that happen, and likewise, we want the boys to understand that they do have worth as a male in the society. When a lot of times society attacks the maleness of young men and to make points that are just not valid. We're yielding in some cases to about 5 to 8% of the population who makes their point by being loud, and they don't make their point by having a good, solid argument.
Very good. David, so social issues are important to conservatives for the Commonwealth. Gary, I'm going to go to you and ask you to expand on education in regards to parental rights and pro-family values. When you were serving on the State Board of Education, you were promoting conservative policies. You mentioned transparency, but also conservative policies. Since you left, we have the Commissioner of Education a year and a half ago actually was promoting LGBT activism, called for a LGBT summit. Now, he wasn't around long enough to follow through with that. He ended up leaving after doubling down on LGBT activism in the schools and standing by the idea of gender-preferred pronouns for both students and teachers. Far left policies that really undermine the values of parents, undermine the primary mission of public education. But Gary, I want to ask you, what do the educational policies look like that prioritize parental rights and pro-family values? Any ideas, some examples of what that might look like?
Yeah, well, certainly this issue that we're talking about here regarding transgender issues is highly relevant to the topic of education. And so we've seen just recently that the Biden administration has redefined Title IX in a way that the original authors of Title IX never could have imagined, to include the idea that discrimination based on gender includes discriminating against someone based on their interpretation of their own gender. And that's going to have far-reaching implications for schools right here in Kentucky. A number of states' attorneys general, including General Coleman here in Kentucky, have pursued a lawsuit against the Biden administration to try to stop this. But, what's also happened in many other states is that the state commissioner of education has directed schools not to comply with this interpretation of Title IX. And we have a new commissioner of education in Kentucky who has been very clear that he wants to be a bridge builder and he wants to be a unifier. And I think he's sincere in doing so. But he's yet to speak on this particular issue, and Kentucky families need him to. And Kentuckians, like Americans in general, are highly tolerant and compassionate people, right? If a child's struggling with gender dysphoria, then we want them to be handled carefully and compassionately, right? But most Kentuckians believe that you're born a male or a female. This is not some far right conservative idea. It's what most human beings believe, have throughout history, and continue to believe. So this is one of those areas where a pro-family perspective on education is highly relevant. The other key issue for us right now is really giving families across Kentucky more options in where their children are able to go to school. And so we're real champions for school choice. As you know, we have a constitutional amendment on the ballot this fall that will give voters the opportunity to decide whether Kentucky will be like every other state that borders us and have some kind of school choice policy option. It has been a hard-won fight to get that on the ballot. We've had to champion that issue over the opposition of a lot of ostensibly conservative Republican members of the legislature. And we're very hopeful that Kentucky families are going to stand up for themselves at the ballot. But then we'll have to come right back in next year and start working with lawmakers again to adopt a really good, robust school choice policy. And so, once again, I think it's proven again and again to be an election winner for pro school choice lawmakers across the country. And it can be here in Kentucky as well. We just want to make sure everybody understands that there are political ramifications for not standing with Kentucky families on this issue. I often like to say this is an issue where Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul and Donald Trump are all in perfect agreement. And anytime that you can get those three gentlemen to agree on something, that's a pretty big deal, right? And yet we still have Republican lawmakers in Kentucky who oppose this issue in the face of opposition of Senators McConnell and Paul and President Trump. So we really have to change the mindset on that issue.
Kentucky is at a crossroads. We can choose to give in to the radical left, or we can choose to engage the culture in a God-honoring way.
I started the Commonwealth Policy Center because I believe that Christians have a responsibility to influence government and society to the glory of God. While the Commonwealth Policy Center's made a significant impact, our work isn't finished. If you'd like to join our movement working for timeless values, then head to our website.
To learn more, go to commonwealthpolicycenter.org.
If you're just tuning in, you are watching The Commonwealth Matters. I'm Richard Nelson, your host, here with David Dickerson and Gary Houchens of Conservatives for the Commonwealth. Gary, you're just talking about the school choice being a priority issue for you. You mentioned this being at the ballot box on November the 5th. Voters will go to the polls and vote on whether or not to allow school choice in any form to come into existence in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Of course, the state Supreme Court ruled that school choice is not allowed under the state constitution. So in order for any kind of school choice, whether it's a charter school or a tax write-off or what have you, the money following the student, there needs to be a change to the Constitution. Is this a priority issue and one that you're going to be engaging? Either Gary or David chime in. Is this something you'll be engaging at the ballot box in November?
It's certainly been a priority issue for us as we have discerned which candidates to support. We definitely want to put our energy behind candidates for political office who are going to stand with Kentucky families on this issue.
Very good. I want to move over to the political side of things. You say on your website that Kentucky is a conservative state, but our legislature, though dominated by a Republican supermajority, is failing to conserve a statewide culture that is consistently pro-family and reflects a vision of human flourishing based on our historic Judeo-Christian heritage. In the beginning of the program, David, you had mentioned that there was an unprecedented move against conservative state house incumbents. Is it fair to say that your group started in part because of that, because sitting incumbent conservatives were targeted by, let's just say, establishment Republicans?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is, Richard. That's one of the reasons that if you allow me to read, C4C came into being, is that we saw men and women who supported conservative policies come under attack because they supported those conservative policies. Sometimes we have members of the General Assembly a little more timid than others, and they're uncomfortable when they have to support a conservative policy which is against the establishment media, against the establishment politicians' desires and wishes. And sometimes it's important. It's always important for us to have those conservative policies come before the members of the General Assembly and at least get a vote on those. Conservative policies in Kentucky will win elections. When we present conservative policies, that are important policies to the rank and file in conservative families, they will always come along and support those candidates at the ballot box. It's just the way it works. As long as we are able to elaborate and to explain ourselves effectively, then people in Kentucky, normally conservative, normally family oriented, will support that candidate, and they will support them overwhelmingly, as we saw in this primary this past May.
David, your group engaged in 10 legislative races. You had a fairly small budget. I think about $70,000 was spent on behalf of the principal conservative candidate. And you faced overwhelming odds. When you look at, I just want to point out two mainline Republican political action committees that the combined total, they raised about $1.5 million. They were supported by donations from Churchill Downs, Better Schools Kentucky, the Louisville Teachers Union. They were supported by Kentucky Hospital Association. There were other groups that were involved too. Besides those two PACs, you had the Chamber of Commerce involved on behalf of the moderate to left-leaning candidates. And yet your small group, C4C, Conservatives for the Commonwealth, with about a $70,000 budget, engaged at a high level. And out of those 10 highly contested races, and again, these were the races that both sides spent a lot of money on. You were successful in 8 out of the 10 legislative races. How did you do that? I think you surprised a lot of people.
Well, it can't boil down to this. We made a specific contrast in every case between the candidate that was a conservative vote in the House in the House and one in the Senate, but in the House primarily. They were always people that supported the conservative policies. They supported school choice. They supported Senate Bill 150, I believe is the designation on the bathroom bill, the transgender bathroom bill. They supported the issues that are important to Kentucky families. And Kentucky families, just like anybody else, they get discouraged when they see their leadership talk and talk and talk and never accomplish things that they believe in. These folks, the races in which we were particularly engaged, not only talk the talk, but they walk the walk, if you'll allow me to cliche it. Their actions followed their words, and that's what Kentuckians want. That's what they expect, and I think we can expect to see more of that in the future. I think more conservative candidates are going to step forward, and they're going to espouse those beliefs, and they're going to act upon their conversations when they get to Frankfort, and we're going to bring this state right along, I believe. I think Kentuckians are conservatives. I think they want conservative leadership, and I think if we can continue to point people toward that direction and let them know the contrasts between the establishment, liberal to moderate establishment, and the conservative Republicans that exist in Kentucky, then I think that we're going to be much more successful in the future, and I look forward to hopefully some really big changes coming in the future.
David, if I could highlight one of those races that you engaged in, you targeted one of the most liberal House members in the legislature, Killian Timoney of Lexington, who voted against fairness in women's sports. He voted against Senate Bill 150, which kept the boys in the boys' bathrooms, girls in the girls' bathrooms, along with kept out gender ideology from our public schools. There were some other things, but Killian Timoney, in his campaign account, I believe it was around $300,000. The person that you supported challenging Representative Killian Timoney was Thomas Jefferson. I think his campaign coffers had about $30-some thousand. He was grossly outspent. Killian Timoney had all of the endorsements, all of the major organizations behind him, all of the money, as I just mentioned. And yet, Thomas Jefferson, your candidate, won by about a 3-1 margin. I want to say it was a 74 to 28%, something like that, 26% margin. Overwhelming victory, even though he was outspent and had the mainline groups, major organizations that were opposed to him. Was that the priority race that you had? If you were to rank out of the 10 legislative races, was that one of your top races?
That was one of the top, yeah. The Timoney race. We'd been told all along that he's the only Republican that can represent that part of Fayette County. Fayette County is a purple county, and he's the only guy that can do that. Nobody else can win. We were told that the entire time. There were issues that people in Fayette and Jessamine County held dear to heart. It was a great election, a great example of what I mentioned earlier, that conservative policies and people that can effectively communicate those conservative policies are going to win elections in Kentucky. And this is just the case in point. Outspent $10 to the dollar. And it's nice to have big bank accounts in a campaign, I can promise you. From what I've seen in the past, never experienced it myself, but it's nice to have a big bank account. And in this case, the big bank account was, for whatever reason, was not successful. And I think that reason, the exact reason, is because the conservative principles that Thomas Jefferson espoused rang a bell in the homes of Republican conservative voters in that primary, and they turned out to elect their person. And I think Jefferson's going to be a very pleasant surprise for the people in that district. I think he's going to be effective, and I think he's going to do a great job.
David Dickerson, thank you so much. Gary Houchens, thank you for joining us, and also for the work that Conservatives for the Commonwealth is doing. If you want to find out more information about them, go to their website. I believe it's conservativesforthecommonwealth.org, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? By the way, Gary, is it at org or a .net?
I think it's conservativeky.org.
And thank all of you for tuning in to the Commonwealth Matters. If you could, go to your favorite podcast platform and rate us, and then tell all your other friends to tune in to the Commonwealth Matters. Thank you so much. And until next time, may God bless you.